I still remember the way my dad's voice cracked that night. Not because he was angry, but because he didn't understand what he was seeing. The mirror reflected two people, him behind me, frozen in disbelief, and me in my mother's old floral dress, trembling so hard that the silk whispered like leaves in the wind. He whispered it before he meant to. "You look just like your mother." The words fell between us like glass breaking. And just like that, the world I'd carefully kept in shadows came flooding into light. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I wasn't supposed to be seen. The dress, her dress, wasn't supposed to leave the back of her wardrobe. But that night it was like something called to me. After she passed, I'd sneak into her room sometimes just to smell her perfume, to remember how warmth lingered even after people didn't. The scent of lilies and old books, it made me feel safe, as if some small part of her still lived in the fabric. That night, I wanted to feel close to her again. I didn't think of it as dressing up. I thought of it as remembering. I traced the fabric against my skin and saw someone softer in the mirror, someone I didn't recognize yet couldn't look away from. There was this stillness, this strange kind of peace, as if the reflection had been waiting for years for me to stop pretending. But then the door opened. Dad stood there with a mug of coffee that trembled slightly in his hand. His eyes weren't angry. They were confused, hollow, frightened even, like he was seeing a ghost. "You look just like your mother," he said again, this time softer, almost apologetic. And I couldn't tell if it was meant as comfort or accusation. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I didn't know if I should speak, apologize, or run. I could barely breathe. He just stood there, staring. And I saw something flicker in his eyes. Grief, memory, love, and something else I couldn't name. Then he turned and walked away without another word. The sound of his footsteps down the hall felt heavier than silence itself. That night, I sat in front of the mirror long after he went to bed. I didn't take the dress off. I just stared at myself, asking 1,000 questions I couldn't yet form. Why did I feel both ashamed and alive at the same time? Why did it feel wrong to be seen but right to exist this way? The mirror became my confessional. Every glance a confession, every breath a secret that refused to die. Have you ever looked in the mirror and seen someone both familiar and entirely new staring back at you? The next morning, everything felt quieter. Not calm, just quieter, like the air was holding its breath. Dad didn't mention what he'd seen. He made breakfast like he always did, 2 eggs, toast, coffee, but there was a hesitation in his movements, like he was measuring every sound, every word. I sat across from him, wearing my usual hoodie and jeans, pretending my hands weren't still trembling. I wanted him to say something, anything. But he just looked at the newspaper as if it could explain everything he didn't know how to ask. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Your mom used to wear that dress on Sundays." I froze mid-bite. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, staring down at the table. "She looked peaceful in it," he continued. He stopped, the word catching. "You looked like her. Too much like her." That was when I realized it wasn't anger I'd seen in his eyes last night. It was grief. Seeing me like that must have felt like seeing her ghost, alive in the wrong body. I didn't know how to comfort him when I barely understood myself. For days after that, we danced around silence. I'd avoid his gaze, and he'd avoid my room. But something had shifted. The mirror in my mother's old bedroom wasn't just a piece of glass anymore. It was a question that waited for me every night. Who are you really when no one is watching? Each time I stood before it, I noticed small changes. How my shoulders softened when I let go of the tension I carried all day. How my expression changed when I wasn't trying to hide. There was gentleness in me I never saw before. I started brushing my hair differently, just experimenting. At first it was curiosity. Then it became something else. A quiet relief. Like finding a note written to me years ago that I'd forgotten to read. One evening, Dad came home early. I was sitting in front of the mirror again. Not in a dress this time, just one of Mom's scarves draped around my shoulders. He paused in the doorway, not stepping inside, just looking. "She would have liked that color on you," he said quietly, then walked away. It was such a small sentence, but it lingered for hours. I didn't know if it was acceptance or just another memory bleeding through, but for the first time, his words didn't hurt. They felt warm. That night, I touched the scarf and whispered, "Thanks, Mom." The reflection smiled back, not a perfect smile, not confident, but real. For a moment I felt seen, even if only by myself. Sometimes I wonder, how do we know the difference between becoming someone new and remembering who we were all along? It started small, like most dangerous things do. A tiny decision that didn't feel like one at the time. I told myself it was nothing. Just a quick walk. Just a test. It was late afternoon when I did it. The world outside was painted gold, and the air smelled of summer rain. I stood by the door for almost 15 minutes, my hand hovering over the knob, heart pounding like I was about to step onto a stage. I wasn't even wearing much. Just jeans that fit a little closer, a soft pastel blouse I'd found in the back of Mom's closet, and a thin cardigan that made me feel balanced. Like armor made of fabric and memory. The mirror had become my silent coach, teaching me posture, softness, expression. But mirrors are kind liars. They don't reflect how the world will see you. When I finally opened the door, the air hit me differently. My chest tightened, but beneath the fear was something electric. I walked slowly, every step feeling like both rebellion and release. The street was mostly empty, but every sound, footsteps, a car door closing, a voice calling from somewhere, felt amplified. I caught my reflection in a shop window. For a split second, I didn't flinch. I didn't see disguise or mistake. I saw possibility. The glass shimmered, catching the light just right, and for once, I liked the person looking back. Then someone spoke. "Hey, you okay?" I turned. It was Mrs. Dyer, our neighbor. She was holding a bag of groceries, her face creased with polite curiosity. I froze.
My throat went dry.
I'm fine, I managed to say, voice cracking slightly. Her eyes narrowed for half a heartbeat, then softened. "You look just like your mom," she said with a nostalgic smile. "That color suits you." It was like being caught in sunlight and shadow all at once. She walked on without another word, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. When I got home, Dad was watching TV. He glanced up briefly, then back at the screen. But I saw it, the quick flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Acceptance. Maybe even pride? I couldn't tell. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. My heart was still racing, but not from fear this time. From freedom. The mirror caught the golden light from my bedside lamp, and for a moment, I thought I saw Mom's reflection beside mine. Faint, warm, smiling. Not judging. Just there. It's strange how one walk can change everything. The world didn't fall apart like I thought it would. It didn't even notice. And somehow, that made me feel both invisible and infinite. Sometimes, the first step toward becoming yourself isn't about courage. It's about exhaustion. You just get tired of pretending. Have you ever done something small that felt like the bravest act of your life? The backlash came quietly, almost by accident, like a wave you don't see until it's already broken over you. It happened a few weeks later, on a day that started out beautifully ordinary. I was in my room, humming to myself as I tried on a soft blue blouse I'd bought from a thrift store across town. The kind of place where no one asks questions, where clothes are just clothes and people are just people. I liked that. I'd hidden the blouse in my backpack for days before daring to wear it. It was my secret victory, my little piece of authenticity. I stood in front of the mirror, turning side to side, trying to decide if the color felt more like me than the last one. That's when I heard the knock. "Hey, bud, can I come in?" Dad's voice. My heart dropped. I didn't have time to hide anything before the door opened. He froze in the doorway again. Same eyes, same silence. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could feel the weight of his gaze like heat against my skin. "You're still doing this," he said finally, voice low but not cruel. "I'm not doing anything," I said softly. "I'm just being." He looked away, rubbing his temple like he was trying to push the thought back into his head where it didn't belong. "You're not your mother," he said. "I know," I whispered. "But I'm still her child." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, confusion, fear, love, all tangled into one. "I lost her once," he said. "I can't lose you too." That sentence hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tell him he wasn't losing me, that maybe for the first time he was actually seeing me. But the words got stuck in my throat. He left before I could find them. That night, the house felt too big. Every room carried her ghost, and now it carried the echo of his disappointment too. I sat in front of the mirror again, tracing the edge of my reflection with my eyes. The blue blouse looked dull now, its brightness dimmed by guilt. But when I looked closely, I realized something. The person in the mirror wasn't crying. Her eyes were sad, yes, but steady. She looked like someone who had stopped running. The mirror had become more than glass now. It was both a wound and a witness. It saw me when the world couldn't. The next morning, Dad didn't say anything. He just left for work, his mug still half full on the counter. But on the kitchen table, next to the folded newspaper, there was something small and unexpected. A silver hair clip. My mother's. I don't know if he meant to leave it for me or if it just fell from some forgotten drawer. But I took it as a sign. Sometimes love doesn't sound like understanding. It just looks like something quietly left behind. Have you ever felt both hurt and loved at the same time, by the same person? Leaving the house used to feel like crossing a border I wasn't sure I was allowed to cross. Every step beyond that front door carried risk. Risk of stares, whispers, misunderstandings. But after the night I found Mom's silver hair clip on the table, something inside me changed. I started wearing it at first only when I was alone. It was small, delicate, with a tiny engraving along the edge that read, "Always shine." I never noticed that detail before. Maybe she'd meant it as advice for herself, but I began to believe she'd left it for me. That clip became my quiet rebellion, my connection to her. And maybe, in some strange way, to Dad too. The first time I wore it outside, I kept my head down. It caught the sunlight as I walked, just enough to make me flinch every time I caught the glint in my peripheral vision. I didn't know whether it was pride or fear that made my heart beat so fast. At the cafe downtown, I ordered my drink in the softest voice I could manage, terrified the barista would see through me, see that I didn't quite belong in my own skin yet. But she just smiled and said, "Cute clip." 3 simple words, and something cracked open inside me. A warmth I hadn't felt in years. It became a small habit visiting that cafe, sitting by the window with my notebook. I started sketching faces, shapes, reflections. The people walking by didn't know how much it meant that they didn't look twice. Sometimes invisibility is its own kind of safety. But not everyone was kind. One afternoon, a group of teenagers passed by the window and snickered, whispering something I didn't catch, but I caught the tone. That sharp, mocking tone that digs into you even if you pretend not to care. I froze, gripping my cup so tightly that the lid bent. My reflection in the glass wavered, distorted by the sunlight and the sting of shame. For a moment, I thought about leaving, about never stepping outside like this again. And then I remembered the hair clip. "Always shine." I reached up and touched it, as if Mom herself was reminding me not to disappear. The reflection steadied. My breathing slowed. I stayed. When I got home that evening, Dad was in the garage, fixing something under the dim yellow light. I lingered at the doorway, unsure whether to speak. He looked up briefly, his eyes landing on the clip in my hair. "That was hers," he said softly. "I know," I replied. He nodded, just once, and went back to his work. But this time, there was no tension in his shoulders. Just quiet acceptance, shaped like peace. That night, as I brushed my hair before bed, I caught myself smiling in the mirror. For the first time, the reflection didn't feel like a secret. It felt like someone I was finally ready to meet. Have you ever realized that courage doesn't always roar? It sometimes just whispers, "Stay"? The first time I met Riley, I almost didn't speak at all. It was at that same cafe where I'd found my quiet corner of the world, my little bubble of safety. I'd gotten used to seeing the same people every morning. The barista who knew my order, the elderly man who read his paper by the window. But that day, someone new was sitting at my usual table. He looked up from his laptop when I walked in, his smile casual, warm. Sorry, he said. Is this your spot? I can move. I shook my head quickly. No, it's okay. I can sit somewhere else. He tilted his head, studying me for a second. Not in the way people sometimes did, not trying to label or categorize me, but with genuine curiosity. Plenty of room, he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I hesitated. I wasn't used to being invited in. Most days, I tried to take up as little space as possible. But something about the ease in his voice made it hard to say no. So I sat. We didn't talk much that first time. Just polite exchanges. The weather, the coffee, the way the rain streaked the window like watercolor. But when I left, he said, "See you around?" As if it were a promise, not a question. Over the next few weeks, I did see him around. Always in the same seat, always with that calm smile. He had this quiet energy that made people relax without realizing it. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself wanting to talk more. One morning, I arrived earlier than usual. He waved me over, sliding a muffin across the table.
You looked like you needed this, he said.
I laughed, an awkward, surprised sound that even startled me. That obvious? Only a little, he said, grinning. Then, after a pause, I like your clip. I froze. My hand instinctively went to my hair. Thanks, it was my mom's. It suits you, he said simply, and went back to typing. No hesitation. No weirdness.
Just that.
It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. The way he said it, as if it were completely normal. As if I were completely normal. That day, I walked home lighter. When I caught my reflection in the shop window again, I didn't flinch. I even smiled. Dad noticed too. That night he asked, "Good day?" and I nodded. He didn't ask for details, but his eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in months. Maybe he saw the same thing I did, that I was finally beginning to breathe. But with every new piece of peace came a small shadow of fear. What if Riley found out who I used to be? What if that changed everything? I caught myself staring at the mirror again that night, touching the silver clip. Always shine, it whispered. Sometimes I think people aren't sent into our lives to fix us. They just hold the light steady long enough for us to see who we already are. Have you ever met someone who made you feel seen before you even spoke? The day the truth began to surface wasn't some dramatic confession. It was an accident, a soft unraveling of all the things I'd kept tied too tightly for too long. Riley and I had started meeting outside the cafe by then, small walks through the park, quiet talks by the river. He had this way of listening that made silence feel safe. He never asked the kind of questions people usually ask to categorize you. He just let me be. One evening, the sky was turning pink, that in-between light that makes everything glow a little softer. I'd worn a light jacket, hair pulled back with Mom's silver clip. Riley looked at me for a moment and smiled. "You always look peaceful at this hour," he said. "Do I?" I asked, surprised.
Yeah.
Like you belong to the sunset. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but his words stayed with me. No one had ever described me that way before, not as something beautiful, but as something whole. We sat on a bench by the water, talking about music, about loss, about how people change when they're forced to hide parts of themselves. At one point, he asked quietly, "Have you ever felt like you're living two lives at once?" It was such an innocent question, but it hit like lightning. My throat tightened. I didn't answer right away. He must have noticed. "Sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's okay," I whispered. "It's just, yeah, I know what that feels like." For a moment, I thought about telling him everything, about my dad, my mother's dress, the mirror, the quiet years of hiding. But fear sat heavy on my tongue. What if saying it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't control? Instead, I said, "Sometimes I feel like the person I am when I'm alone is the only one who can breathe." Riley nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's the one who's real." We sat in silence for a long time after that, watching the water reflect the fading light. I wanted to believe him. When I got home, Dad was on the porch, working on an old radio. He looked up when I approached. "You've been smiling more lately," he said. I hesitated, then smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just starting to remember who I am. He nodded, the faintest hint of pride in his eyes. Your mother would have liked that. Later that night, as I stood before the mirror brushing my hair, the reflection felt different again, softer, but stronger. The mirror had once shown me what I feared I could never be. Now it was starting to show me what I'd already become. The silver clip caught the light, scattering it across the glass. And for a moment, I realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't pretending anymore. It's strange, isn't it? How the truth doesn't always burst out. It sometimes just slips quietly into the room and waits for you to notice it's been there all along. Have you ever felt your truth rising before you were ready to speak it? Truth has a way of finding its voice, even when you try to keep it quiet. I didn't plan to tell Riley. I thought I could just exist in that small, safe space we'd built, where no one needed labels and everything just was. But life doesn't let you live halfway forever. It happened one afternoon, when we were walking by the river again. The wind was restless that day, tossing my hair around. I reached up to fix it, and the silver clip slipped from my fingers, landing in the dirt with a faint metallic sound. Riley bent to pick it up, brushing the dust from it carefully. "Always shine," he read aloud, smiling. Then he looked up at me, his expression soft but curious. "This was your mom's, right?" I nodded.
Yeah.
"It's kind of my connection to her. My reminder." He held it out to me, but I didn't take it right away. Something in his eyes, some gentle patience, made me want to keep talking. My chest tightened. "Riley," I said quietly, "there's something I should probably tell you." He didn't move, didn't speak. Just listened like he always did. I took a deep breath. "The person you see now isn't exactly who I've always been. My dad, he still thinks I'm figuring things out. Maybe I am. But when I look in the mirror now, I see her.
Me.
The person I should have been all along." My voice shook on that last word. He was silent for a long moment. The river moved gently beside us, carrying the sound of birds and distant laughter. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, and my heart started to sink under the weight of that silence. Then finally he spoke. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "But thank you for trusting me with one." I blinked, caught between disbelief and relief. He went on. "The way I see it, you're still you. Maybe more you than most people ever get to be." Something in me broke open then, not from pain, but from release. It wasn't about being understood perfectly. It was about being accepted anyway. We walked for a while after that, saying nothing, just existing in the kind of silence that feels safe. Before we parted, he said, "Keep shining, okay? For both of us." That night, I told Dad. It wasn't planned either, it just came out. He'd asked how my day was, and somehow the truth just spilled out between us. I told him about Riley, about the mirror, about how I didn't want to hide anymore. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even look away. When I finished, he took a long, shaky breath and said, "When I said you looked like your mother, I didn't mean you had to be her. His voice broke. She was brave. I see that in you now." There were tears in his eyes when he said it, and for the first time, I let mine fall too. Later, as I stood before the mirror, I clipped the silver pin into my hair again. But this time, I wasn't trying to be like her. I was simply being me, with her courage and his quiet love, reflected in the same glass that had once frightened me. It's strange how acceptance doesn't always sound like fireworks. Sometimes it's just a trembling voice saying, "I see you," and meaning it. Have you ever felt the world finally exhale when you stopped hiding who you are? The first time I stepped out fully as myself, it didn't feel like a grand transformation. There were no spotlights, no applause. Just morning light, soft and golden, streaming through the curtains, and a feeling of quiet certainty humming beneath my skin. I had spent so many nights staring into that mirror, watching versions of myself flicker in and out of focus. But that morning, the reflection didn't shift anymore. It held steady, and for once so did I. The outfit was simple, a white blouse, light jeans, and Mom's silver clip nestled just above my ear. But simplicity can be powerful when it's honest. Dad was in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up from his coffee. No shock, no confusion this time, just a long, thoughtful look, and then a small smile.
You look ready, he said.
I smiled back. I think I am. I didn't know what exactly I was ready for, only that hiding wasn't part of it anymore. The day felt different, like the air itself had shifted. I took the bus into town. The world moved around me as it always had, but my heart wasn't racing this time. I caught my reflection in the bus window and didn't look away. I met my own eyes and thought, this is who I am, and it's enough. There were still stares, of course, some curious, some kind, some unkind. But I'd learned something powerful. People's reactions say more about their comfort than my worth. At the cafe, Riley was already there. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. You look like yourself, he said, and it was the most beautiful compliment I'd ever received. We spent the afternoon talking, laughing, planning. Not about labels or definitions, just life. Books, dreams, the little things that make days worth living. For the first time, I wasn't filtering myself. Every word, every expression, felt natural. When I told him I was nervous about how people would see me, he leaned forward and said, "They'll see what you show them. And you're showing light." Later, when I got home, Dad was sitting on the porch again. The radio beside him was playing one of Mom's old songs, soft, nostalgic, familiar. He looked up and said, "Your mother would have loved today." "Why?" I asked. "Because you smiled like her," he said. Only this time, it wasn't pretending. That night, I stood in front of the mirror once more. Not as a stranger, not as a secret, but as someone whole. The reflection didn't scare me anymore. It inspired me. The mirror wasn't a test now. It was a friend, a witness to every moment I'd fought to exist. I touched the silver clip and whispered, "Always shine," like a prayer, like a promise. It's funny how the world doesn't change much when you finally do. The streets are the same, the people are the same, but the way the light hits everything feels new. Because it's not the world that becomes brighter. It's you. Have you ever had a day when you realized you were finally living instead of just surviving? The story didn't end with a grand speech or a miracle moment. It ended quietly, in the living room, with dust swirling through the sunlight and an old photo album open on the table. Dad had found it that morning, tucked away in the attic, a collection of memories I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of birthdays, school plays, my mother's laughter frozen in time. Her eyes in every photo glowed with a kind of warmth that outlasts grief. He called me in softly. "You might want to see this," he said, his voice caught somewhere between nostalgia and something gentler. I sat beside him on the couch, brushing the dust from the cover. The pages turned slowly, each one a heartbeat from another life. There she was, Mom, in her favorite floral dress, the same one I'd worn that night when everything changed. "She really loved that dress," Dad said, smiling faintly. Said it made her feel like herself. I traced my finger along the edge of the photo. "I think I understand that now." He nodded. "I think she'd be proud of you." The words hit me deeper than I expected. I swallowed hard, the air thick with all the things we'd never said aloud. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. Then he placed his hand over mine. "I spent a long time missing your mother, and worrying I'd lose you too. But I see her strength in you now. Not because you look like her, but because you found your own way to be brave." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing one of her old songs. The kind she used to hum while cooking, her voice wrapping around the house like sunlight. I looked across the room at the mirror on the wall. The same mirror that had once felt like a battlefield now reflected something entirely different, a home. A family pieced back together, maybe not perfectly, but with love in every fracture. Dad closed the album gently and smiled. "You know," he said, "she always used to tell me that mirrors don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth either. They only show what's ready to be seen." I smiled, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "Then I guess it's finally showing me." He nodded. "It is." That evening, I went for a walk as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose, the same colors as the dress, the same shades my mother loved. The breeze caught my hair, and for a moment, I could almost feel her beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a presence, quiet, steady, proud. I stopped by the river where Riley and I had once talked, watching the water ripple with color. I unclipped the silver pin from my hair and held it in my hand. It glimmered in the dying light, its engraving catching the sunset. Always shine. I didn't let it go. I just held it close to my heart, knowing I didn't need the mirror anymore to believe in who I was. Because I finally understood what my mother had lived, what my father had learned, what I had fought for. To shine isn't to be perfect. It's to be seen fully, exactly as you are, and to love yourself anyway. As I walked home, the last of the sunlight followed me, wrapping everything in gold. I caught one last glimpse of my reflection in a shop window, and this time, I didn't see my mother's ghost. I saw me, whole, alive, and shining. Sometimes healing isn't about forgetting who you were. It's about realizing you've become everything you needed all along. Have you ever found yourself in the reflection of someone you thought you'd lost?